Hello and welcome to the Bestseller Experiment, where we continue to discover what makes a bestseller and inspire you to start, finish and publish your book. I'm Mark Stay.
And I'm Mark DeVoe, and thank you everyone. Thank you for joining us this week. We always appreciate old and new ears alike. And if you are more of the new ear type of podcast listener, welcome, and we hope you enjoy the show. And if you're interested in supporting this podcast, we'd like to thank all of our amazing patrons who are with us along the way.
Yes.
And if you'd like to be one of them and you'd like to get access to loads of extra content, deep dives and the like, hundreds of hours, I believe, of extra content now, pop along to bestsellerexperiment.com/support. Mr. Stay, it's been a long week, isn't it? We should be like relaxing, chilling out. It's the summer, but it's just everything's ramping up, isn't it? Life just keeps on moving forward.
I've done a bit. I went to the beach. I went for a walk with my son. It is nice. You do have to, find these little moments. But I don't know about you. It's one of these things when you're self-employed and there's not much money coming in, you're kind of like, I can't be sitting on my backside. I've got to be, hustling, trying to get opportunities and stuff like that, and doing bits and bobs and events and stuff like that. So, speaking of which, I had a great time at Chatham Library last week as part of the Medway Literary Festival. And thanks to everyone who came along, and saw a couple of listeners there as well, which was brilliant. Now, here's an obscure one. If anyone turns up to this, if you come up and say, I'm a bestseller experiment listener, I'm going to give you a book for free, because this is the Chiswick Country Fair, right? Okay. Saturday, 24th of June. It's got maypole dance. I nearly said pole dancing. Maypole dancing.
No, that's a fair I would like to go and see. That would mix up the old tea and crumpets on a Saturday afternoon, wouldn't it? Blimey.
Maypole dancing, Morris dances as an egg throwing contest. Basically, it's like you're actually visiting Woodville Village from the books. So if a listener comes up, first of all, if you can find it, I'm not giving you any clues, right? The Chiswick Country Fair. If you go to its Facebook page, it doesn't tell you where it is. Okay, so you've really got to look for it. And it's so small. Chiswick, you could walk it in 5 minutes. But I did their Christmas fair. I did really well. Sold a lot of books. It's brilliant. So, and it's lovely. And the sun will be shining, hopefully, not guaranteed. But come and say hello.
Chiswick Fair. Mark, if I could, I'd just to surprise you, get on a flight and just show up there just for the pole dancing. But actually, weirdly enough, you might laugh, Mark, but let me tell you a story. 1st of July, for all the Canadians listening to this, 1st of July is Canada Day. And we have a tradition in Canada, at least in our town, in our city of 10,000 people. They call them cities when they're 10,000 people in Canada. I can't get my head around that. Anyway, they have a big, Canada Day parade, and we have all of the local sports teams and the communities and, the odd businesses. And there's this one year we're standing at our kids are in like the football team and they're marching along, and they've got these great floats. And towards the end of the float parade, we do see this van come along with what looks like a pole on it. And I'm like squinting going, is that a pole? And lo and behold, it was the local pole dancing club. Now, I will say that it's fitness pole dancing. Yeah, of
course. It's very, very good exercise.
But you should have seen the eyes popping out of it was all good family fun. But you know what? It was just so surreal. It was just weird. Like here's the hockey team, hooray, and here's the pole dancing club, and then just to finish it off, we had the belly dancing club come along. Now, I think belly dancing's amazing, but then just to completely fry my brain, at the time my little boy, who's like, I don't know, about 10, he tugs on my shirt and goes, Dad, that's my teacher. And his teacher's one of the belly dancers, and he's like, what's going on? It was like Twilight Zone Canada Day parade. So yeah, you just never quite know what you get when you show up to one of those in Canada. Absolutely brilliant. Yeah. So if you've got any funny stories about parades in your town, let us know, because I'm sure there's some good ones. But listen, Mark, we have got such an amazing, and I know I always big up our authors because they're all amazing, but this week is just mind-blowing. And we've got so much we want to talk about with this interview that we're going to cut this bit short and get straight into it. So Mark, tell us about today's interview.
Yes, we did a lot of work just before we started recording. If anything, it was a bit of a charrette. So yes, this week's special guest is none other than J.D. Kirk, which is the pen name of multi-award-winning author, screenwriter and writer of comics Barry Hutchison. Barry was born and raised in Fort William in the Highlands of Scotland. He wanted to be a writer from the age of 9 when a kindly librarian wrote his name on the spine of a notebook in which he'd written a terrible short story and put it on the shelf. And we talk more about that. Since then, he's written, right, sit down everyone, he's written over 150 books for children as Barry Hutchison, and many more for adults. I think it's over 200 books in 10 years, and now is thoroughly enjoying murdering people as J.D. Kirk. And we discuss how both Iain Banks and a school event changed his life. We talk about working with publishers and the unicorn compromise, and how a condition called aphantasia affects his writing.
Oh, folks, seriously, you just have to
So
stop
much
what
fun.
you're doing. If you're driving, I promise you're going to want to write notes. If you're gardening, you just have to find yourself a nice chair in the corner of the garden and just sit and listen to this, because it's absolutely brilliant. So let's dive in and listen to Mark chatting with the absolutely phenomenal J.D. Kirk.
J.D. Kirk, welcome to the bestseller experiment. How are you today, sir?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, not too bad at all. Although, for some reason, despite it being March and there being snow on the ground, my hay fever has kicked in. And I woke up with really itchy eyes and runny nose. I don't know how that's happened.
Okay, fair enough. Well, and the other thing, just to confuse listeners, I'm probably going to end up calling you Barry because that's your real name. So
That is my real name, yes.
we'll call you Barry throughout, but you're writing as J.D. Kirk. And, well, you've written as all sorts. So let's go back to the very start, because this is an extraordinary story. But let's start with Mrs. McAllister, the school librarian, and the influence she had in your career.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I was, like I'm in Scotland, so we do primary 1 to primary 7. That's our primary school years. And then we do first year to 6th year, and that's our high school years. So I was about 9 years old, maybe slightly younger, actually. But we had, I didn't read many books. I read comics all the time. I was obsessed with comics, the Beano, the Dandy, and all that stuff. And I had a teacher who hated that fact that I read comics. She did not like comics. She did not like me because I liked comics. And she used to kind of relentlessly mock me in the way that some teachers do for my love of comics. But it didn't help that I wasn't into football or any of that stuff, you know what I mean? So, but one day we had a new librarian, Mrs. McAllister, at the local library was attached to our school. And we got taken along and we had to meet Mrs. McAllister and tell Mrs. McAllister the kind of books that we love to read. And I was made to go last. So the other kids would stand up and say, oh, I like books about ponies or whatever. And the teacher says, right, Barry, now you tell Mrs. McAllister what you like to read. And I kind of shuffled up and said, I like reading comics and that. And she said, oh, wait there. And she went through the back. And she came back a minute later with this massive stack of Beanos and Dandies and Spider-Man comics and Superman comics. And she dumped them in front of me and said, there you go, you can read them. The teacher was fuming. But I was like, oh my God, this is Nirvana. So I went back to the library every day and I worked my way through this massive stack of comics. And I realised now, looking back, that Mrs. McAllister would have been an excellent drug pusher because as I was kind of reading these comics, she would look at the ones I was enjoying and she'd say, oh, that comic's got a robot in it. There's a book about robots here. Have a look at that. And I would read the book about robots and go, oh, that's really good. And she weaned me onto the hard stuff. You know, she got me off comics. I mean, I still love comics. I know I've written for the Beano and everything now. So comics were still my first love in terms of reading, but she weaned me onto books. And I would start going to the library and I'd ask for a type. I'd say, have you got a book about monsters? And she'd go, yeah, come this way to the monster section. Or I'd say, is there a book about, ghosts? And she would take me to the ghosts or whatever. Not to the actual ghosts, to the books about ghosts. The library wasn't haunted, I should stress. And I remember one day, and I was about 9 when this happened, and I went in and I was obsessed that week. You know how when you're young, you get obsessed with things for about a week, and then you lose interest. I was obsessed with ninjas.
Right.
And I says, I need a book about ninjas, stat. And she said, I don't have any books about ninjas. And I felt like bereft. I felt like, the library has failed me. And she says, but wait there. And she went through the back again. And she came back a few minutes later with a big notebook and a pen and said, write a story about ninjas. And I took it away and I wrote this god-awful short story full of disemboweling. I was obsessed with disembowelment for some reason. The removal of bowels I was obsessed with. So I wrote this short story about a ninja who disemboweled a lot of people. And I gave it to her and she read it. And to her eternal credit, she wrote my name on the spine of this notebook and she put it on the shelf. And in movies, when you see like the clouds part and that shaft of light and the Heavenly Angel Choir, that happened. And I've thought, I want to do this. I want to have my books on bookshelves. So I was 9 then. My first properly published book came out in 2010. So I was 32.
Well, look, the petition to get a statue of Mrs. McAllister put up in the town starts now, because that is, top work, absolutely top
and that's
work.
why I'm always horrified when I see, talk of libraries closing and all that stuff, because libraries change lives, and they changed mine and they've changed millions of others, and it's terrifying, but they're closing them down.
No, I agree. I also, I'm interested in the role that Auntie Doriss's typewriter played in your career as well. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. My Auntie Doriss, my mum's sister, she passed away around about that same time, I think, maybe about 9, 10. So it was quite a sort of important period in my life in terms of becoming a writer. And there was an old typewriter in her house that was just going to be chucked out, and I said, well, can I have this? And there were no ribbons on it. Well, the ribbons were there, but it was ink had all but run out. But I became obsessed with just typing on it, just the noise of it, and just seeing paper going through, and that sort of the mechanism of typing and creating things on this. And even though you could barely read the letters, and they were all slightly overlapping, and it was kind of a really sort of magical thing for me. And I also at that point was watching a lot of Murder, She Wrote, which on my mug, and that bit with Jessica Fletcher just does that. I would sit and do that during the credits for Murder, She Wrote, typing nothing but nonsense. But I just loved that movement and that motion of it, and my fingers creating this stuff that was coming out of my head. So those two things, which happened quite close together, were kind of key to me becoming an author, I reckon.
It's a very satisfying thing, an old-fashioned typewriter. I had one. The ribbon and everything's so fiddly, and it's such a pain, and you can't erase anything. But the thunk of those keys, for me, it wasn't Jessica Fletcher. It was the Stephen J. Cannell end credits. I don't know if you remember that, where he typed and ripped something out of
and pull the paper out.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I have my Bluetooth keyboard is like an old, and it does. It's not quite the clack, but it's close. It's close.
And then we skip forward a few years, and this author's been mentioned a few times. I was lucky enough to meet him once. You got some top advice from Iain Banks. Tell us about the Iain Banks experience.
Well, in high school, in secondary school, I had told a teacher who was kind of deputy head teacher. And he'd asked, what do you want to do with your life? And I said, I want to be an author. And he said, don't be so silly. People like you don't become authors. That was his exact words. Be an English teacher. which I felt was disparaging to English teachers for a start. There was a lot of very, very talented English teachers out there. But he said, don't be so, and it kind of knocked my confidence a bit. This person in sort of authority and who seemed to know what he was talking about, had said, your dream is a joke, and had laughed it off. And then about a year after that, Iain Banks came to our school, and it was the first time I'd met an actual author, like a real author before. And he did this talk, and it was like massively inspiring. And I went up afterwards and spoke to him and said, I'd love to write, but this teacher had said this. And we shall say that Iain had some choice words which he shared about that teacher and told me to do it. He says, go and do it. Go and just like you. And And just chatting to him, kind of, because he said he'd had very similar things before, and people said, you'll never make it, you'll never do it.
Yeah.
So it was like, right, okay, I'm going to do it. And fast forward to about 2012. So this was about 1993, and then fast forward about 2012. And I was sitting next to Iain at a signing table at the Lennox Love Book Festival in Scotland. And I mentioned this to him. And I says, this is, how an inspiration he's been and all that stuff. And he'd finished signing before I had. He'd started well before me. I was signing beyond. He'd started like a good hour before I did. But I was getting to the end of the queue and signing all these kids' books. And then Iain came up and he'd bought a copy of the book and said, can you sign that for me? Oh. So it was just like the most amazing thing. And the other thing about that story, I should say as well, is in about 2014, I was at the Edinburgh International Book Festival. I was about to go on for my event, and I saw that teacher. He came in, walking into the thing, and he had, like, at the Edinburgh International Festival, you've got like minders with you who make sure you get to the venue in time.
Yeah.
So I shrugged them off. I made a beeline to this teacher, and I said, "Oh, how are you?" And he said, "Oh, so what are you doing here?" I said, "Oh, I'm just here to talk about my book series for HarperCollins." And he went, "Oh, well, I'll maybe come and see it." And I says, "You can't. It's sold out."
Yes.
And walked away. I should stress, it wasn't sold out. But it wasn't letting him know that.
Oh, that's fantastic. It's immensely satisfying. Well, look, let's talk about those first books. You mentioned that you said you were about 31 when you had your first book published. Talk about the road to getting published for the first time.
Yeah, so I actually, the first writing work I ever sold was when I was 17, and I wrote a film script. A film script called Curse of the Bog Women, which was a comedy horror set in the Highlands. And a New York film producer spotted it. I'd shared it online in this kind of writers group thing and optioned it. And I ended up kind of developing that a bit. Unfortunately, that company then went bankrupt and the film never happened. But I wrote another film script called Making a Killing that was set in Glasgow. And a British film company picked that up, and we're looking to develop that. That company then also went bankrupt, and I decided at that point I better stop writing film scripts because I single-handedly collapsed the entire global film industry.
You're a jinx, is that the feeling?
So I just started writing. I started working in proper jobs. I hadn't gone to uni because this film stuff had it all happened, and I thought, well, I'm going to be living in Hollywood in a year, you know what I mean? So I started doing a succession of proper jobs that I wasn't particularly good at, and all the while I was writing. But I was always doing little bits. It never really went anywhere. They were for my own amusement. And then in about 2006, I want to say, so I was 27, 28, thereabouts, I saw an article in my local newspaper saying that there had been a talk by these two literary agents, and they had there was running a little competition basically. So you sent them your manuscript. The winners, the 10 winners, would be picked, and they would get feedback on their manuscript and how to improve it and how to get it ready for submission. So I submitted this, thought nothing more of it. And about a month later, I got a phone call from one of the agents saying, we'd like to take you out of the contest. And I thought they meant the book was so poor that they'd actually phoned me up rather than just not mention it. They'd phoned me up to say, never darken our door again. But instead, she said, we'd like to represent it. We think that we could sell this. And it was a children's horror book called Mr. Mumbles. About a boy whose imaginary friend from when he's 4 comes back when he's 12 and tries to kill him in a variety of horrible ways. So they took that to HarperCollins. HarperCollins then said, could you write 6 of these? And I said, yep. And they said, can you have the outline for the next 5 by 2 o'clock this afternoon because we have an acquisition meeting? It was 12 o'clock at this point, I should stress. So I then spent the next 2 hours coming up with the plots for the next 5 books, sent that to them, and then they went, yeah, we'll do that. So they published those. So I did those for HarperCollins and another few books for HarperCollins, and then did books for Penguin Random House and Nosy Crow and Egmont and just loads of different children's publishers. Well over 150 books in total under a variety of names. I was Odin Redbeard for the Vulgar the Viking series. I was Armageddon for the Disaster Diary series. I've officially, according to the British Library, I have co-written a book with Roald Dahl about decades after his death, because I was asked by a publisher on the Roald Dahl estate to do this non-fiction book called George's Marvelous Experiments,
right,
which was based on George's Marvelous Medicine, and there were extracts from George's Marvelous Medicine in it. So on the record for the book at the British Library, it's me and Roald Dahl as co-authors of that book, which is
fantastic,
which is pretty crazy.
Brilliant. Well, then, like I said, you did, and we're going to talk about your incredible rate of writing later, and perhaps the reasons behind that. But then there's a big pivot in your career, Space Team, which came about because someone asked you to give a talk about self-publishing. Is that right?
Yeah, well, not necessarily self-publishing as such. I was asked by a school to go in and talk about how kids could publish their own work. It was about talking to teenagers who wanted to write and how they could publish their own work. And I had no idea, because as far as I knew, you typed a book, you emailed it to London, and 6 months to 2 years later, a book appeared in the world somewhere. And that was my entire understanding of the process. But they were offering to pay me money to go in and do it. So I thought, well, I will damn well learn how kids can publish their own work. And I had this idea for a comedy science fiction book knocking around in my head for a while. So I sat down and wrote this book in about 3 weeks, the first Space Team book. And I learned, I did it as an experiment. As I say, I designed the cover myself. I edited it myself. I thought, if kids are doing this, they're doing all these things themselves. They're not outsourcing it. So I did all that. I did my own marketing, which wasn't really very much, and I put it online. And within about a week, it was outselling my children's books. And I thought, all right, okay, this is interesting. And I wrote a second book, and it started selling even more. And by the time the third book was out, I was earning more from those books in a day than I was earning in 6 months of royalties from 150 children's books.
Wow.
So at that point, I thought, right, well, indie publishing is where my future lies. And I still had some kids' contracts to fulfill. I had other books to deliver and all that stuff. So I was doing that alongside the Space Team books. But as I was, as those fell away, the publishers would say, right, what have you got next? What's coming next? And I kind of had to say, nothing. I can't justify spending the time writing one of those books when I could write one of these and not only make far more money from it, but be more creatively fulfilled from it. I don't have to second guess, what a sales and marketing department in a publisher wants to see, or I don't, often they would say things like, you'd have this idea for a book and the editor would love it. And the sales and marketing team would say, brilliant, can you put a unicorn in it? Because unicorns are very, very popular at the moment. And you kind of go, no, not really. But that you kind of find yourself in a situation where you would have to sort of compromise a bit like that. Where doing it myself, I didn't have to compromise. I could write whatever I wanted. And what's interesting is a lot of the books I wrote were for kids, were kind of comedy stuff. And some of the publishers had said they hadn't really tried selling it in the US because they said we don't think the humor translates. But Space Team, which was the same humor, did massive numbers in the States, way, way more in the States than it did in the UK. So I think just letting stuff find its audience like that is the way to go, rather than trying to second guess what's going to work where.
Yes. I think particularly with humor, it's always a difficult sell because no one wants to, particularly publishers and editors, they're very, very nervous about declaring what's funny and what isn't because it's such a subjective thing. And it's such a tough sell. But like I say, the self-publishing allows you to find all those people with the same funny bone as you across the world. Now, that pivot, self-publishing, that really changed everything for you. And you started your own company, Zertex Media Publishing. How soon did that come around? And how did you build that?
Well, the first Space Team was 2016. We formed the company in 2019. At that point, I was free of all kind of other publishing work. It was just doing my own stuff. The name Zertex, they're the villains in the Space Team series.
Gotcha.
So there's like this global or this galactic corporation of evil called the Zertex Corporation. So I thought, right, this is going to be Zertex Publishing, and so that was 2019 that I put that together.
And then you moved on to thrillers with like the DCI Jack Logan series and the Bob Hoon spin-off series from that. Tell us about those and the pivot to those and becoming J.D. Kirk.
Yeah, well, I had the idea for the first crime book. Well, I had an idea for one crime book in my head. And it kind of came about when my daughter and I were out walking a dog in the middle of nowhere, because I live in the Highlands, where everywhere is the middle of nowhere, really. But we were out walking in this place called Leanican Forest. The dog ran into the trees. My daughter was about 6, about at the time, thereabouts. Dog ran into the trees, wasn't coming back. I thought, right, I'll go in and find the dog. You wait here, don't go anywhere. It was a big path, middle of nowhere. I went in, found the dog. When I came out, my daughter had disappeared. And I immediately thought, my wife's going to kill me. I thought, well, she wouldn't have wandered off. She was a well-behaved child. She wouldn't have wandered off anywhere. There's nowhere to wander. She's not in sight. Someone must have taken her. I got in a real panic, and then a moment later, she popped up from behind the bush, laughing her head off. But that sort of terror, that feeling lingered, and by the time we'd made it home, because it was about a 10-mile drive home, by the time I got home, I thought, well, this would be a great start for a book, the child just disappears like that in the middle of nowhere. But I'm naturally a very lazy person when it comes to things like research. So I thought, well, I can never write a crime book, because then you need to research how the police work and all that stuff. And in about 2018, I was doing an event for Amazon. I was doing a talk about Kindle, and the author L.J. Ross was there, massively successful crime fiction author.
Yep.
And I told her that I had this idea for a crime book, and she said, "Oh, go for it. Just do it. Give it a go." So I thought, yeah, I might do that. And the barrier was still that idea of not knowing how a police investigation works. So I did a bit of research, and I wasn't a big crime reader at that point myself, really. I read a few, but I wasn't massively into crime fiction. And then I realized, as I did a bit of research, that people don't want to know what happens in a crime investigation, because that's really boring. It's like an actual murder investigation is tedious, and it's 200 people making phone calls and going door to door in the hope that something turns up. So when I realized that, and I thought, all you've really got to do is have a very basic understanding of the process, chuck in a couple of acronyms, and basically that's all people want. People don't want real life investigation. People want a fiction, a small team or an individual detective, so they can get to know their personalities and all that stuff. So I thought, well, I could do that. I'd written Space Team, which was a team of people. I thought I can write about a team of detectives. And then I was doing another event in early 2019 when I was due to be talking again with L.J. Ross. And Louise and her husband had been so encouraging the first time that I'd spoken to them about it that I didn't want to let them down by not having started this book. So I knew they were going to ask. So I thought, right, I better start it. So I had it started by the time we met up, and then I had it finished in April, and it came out in May 2019. And I immediately started outselling all the Space Team books combined. It just went huge. And I thought, I need to do more of these. And I loved writing it. What I couldn't go over was, because the Space Team was obviously like ridiculous, and it's in space and it's aliens and it's mad stuff happening, and the kids' books were all largely ridiculous. It was the Spectre Collectors, where it's the team hunting ghosts, and Night of the Living Ted, which is evil teddy bears coming to life, and all that stuff. So the detective stuff was far more grounded. It's like it's real people doing actual stuff. And I was amazed how much I enjoyed writing it. What also surprised me, though, was I thought it was deadly serious. I thought this is a really I've finally done like a serious book, and the first reviews were like very funny.
Oh, really?
How's this happen? What? And it's that sort of character interaction thing of just the banter and all that stuff. And but it was never meant to be funny. But as it's gone on, that's become one of the sort of hallmarks of the series. That there is that character humor. It's not there's not really slapstick or there's not jokes as such, but that character interaction. And I realised that a lot of the kind of main character in the Logan books and in the Hoon spin-off, there's an element of me in there that they're kind of middle-aged men just exasperated by the world around them. It's that thing of going that just made weary by the world. And that comes out in quite a funny way, so it's become a big kind of hallmark of the series now, the humour.
Fantastic. Well, let's talk about one of the reasons you're on the podcast, and I'm amazed we haven't had you on the podcast before, but I'm glad we've timed this for now, because a bunch of our listeners got in touch about a blog you put up fairly recently about aphantasia and the role that it's played in your life. Tell us about aphantasia and how it's affected you as a writer.
Okay. Well, the first thing I will say is I have no idea if you pronounce it aphantasia or aphantasia.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. Yep.
No idea. I've always called it aphantasia, but I've no idea. So I've just,
Me neither.
and the people speaking about it have no idea either. What it is an inability to see mental pictures in your head.
Right.
So if you were to shut your eyes now and picture a blue ball, most people would have some sort of visual type effect behind their eyes. They would either see a blue ball in high definition, or they would see a slightly fuzzy blue ball, or they would see a blue shape or whatever. But they have this sort of mind's eye which allows them to see things. So, you can daydream and you can imagine things, or you can recall someone's face or whatever. I think exclusively in words. So I don't have any images. I shut my eyes and imagine a blue ball. I see darkness, and I think of a list of attributes that a blue ball would have. So I can describe a blue ball. I can describe any sort of blue ball of any size and any texture, any shape, because I know the words that apply to it. But I can't see it in any form at all. And I figured this out, that this was a thing. My family and I were on holiday. And we got talking. I can't remember how it came up. We were talking about it, and something they said just made me go, "Hang on a minute." I think it was my son, and I kind of went, "Hang on a minute. Like, are you saying you can see things in your mind?" And I thought, this is a form of mental illness. Yeah, this is there's something gone wrong in his mind, or he's a mutant. Like he's evolved into some other state. And he went, "Yeah." And then I said to my wife and daughter, I said, this is mad. He can picture things in his mind. And they went, "What's he talking about?" Of course he can. And then it was like, what? And I'd always thought, picture it, mind's eye, all that was just figures of speech.
Right.
And it, suddenly everything made sense, because my dad would say when I couldn't sleep, it was like, try counting sheep. Mm-hmm. And I'd go, What? What do you mean? What a sheep? What are you on about? Or teachers going, right, imagine you've got 3 apples in one hand and 2 in the other. Count those apples. And I'll go, I can't, there's nothing there, you lunatic. I can't count these apples. They don't exist. It's 5. I know how to count, but I can't do. But suddenly all those things, that sort of started making sense. And why things I tried meditation years ago, and it was close your eyes, picture a beach. And I'm thinking, beach, right? There's probably seagulls. I'm just thinking of the words. So my brain gets more and more. My brain doesn't tune out to looking at this lovely image. It starts working harder to conjure up all the words that are associated with that. So, so things like that suddenly made sense. Why that didn't make sense at the time, sort of thing. So I think it's 1 in 100. I can't remember how many people have it. It's not that uncommon,
right?
But it's a complete lack of mental images. And I think that's why I write so quickly.
Right.
Because I'd imagine a lot of authors will I'll picture a character, and now I need to describe that character. So I need to translate that picture into words, and then those words go onto the page.
Yeah.
For me, that's how it starts. It is words, and that's that. I can just, I channel those words onto doing my typewriter.
Yeah, because I personally, I almost see the scene in my head, and I'm there. I'm like, describing it as it plays out. So you cut out that middleman. You get straight to the words.
I don't see any of that. No, which has its pros and cons. Like I say, it's all words to start with, but things like I'm terrible at remembering what my characters look like because I don't have a picture of them. People say, "Who would you like to play?" Logan on TV. I don't know what he looks like. He's quite big, and there's certain so they'll all have kind of key characteristics which are easy to remember. So those things. So Logan's big and he wears a coat. So things like that allow me to kind of conjure up that picture that I can then write about that character again, but things like what I always struggled with was like scene composition. So if I was saying, right, they're in a room, there's 10 people in this room, and who's talking to who? Now people will go, right, a picture in the room and I know who's standing where, but I could not picture, so I didn't know who was. So I would use like Lego, and I have Lego men and go, okay, so he's now there now, so I know that he can't talk to him because they're on the other side of the room. But you can talk to them and he won't hear them, So there was workarounds to try and get over those inabilities to see things.
But the flip side is that you have this incredibly prolific output. I mean, how many sort of words are you writing a day? How long are you writing a day for?
When I'm writing right now, I'm in a planning stage. When I'm writing, generally I'll aim for at least 3,000 a day, and I'll write kind of 6 days a week. That's a lie. I write 7 days a week, but I tell my wife I'm writing 6 days a week because she insists that I have a day off. So I'll sneakily do like a wee cheeky, 2,000 words. So generally that roughly about 3,000 sort of minimum. Some days, I mean, when I was finishing the book that comes out in May, the one that got away, the last day was 12,000 words. So
right.
It's if things are going well, then it can just keep going. My record is 16,000 words in a day for one of my kids' books. A book so scary, it's called Doc Mortis. It's one of the Invisible Fiend series. A book so frightening, it's illegal to own it in Germany.
Really? So, nice one. That's quite an accolade.
My proudest achievement.
That must have been getting that. Was there like an official diagnosis, or just realizing that knowing that you're not the odd one, you just perceive the world differently to most? That must have been a bit of a pivotal event for you. It must have,
Yeah, absolutely. It blew my mind. I did a deep dive into researching it,
Right,
so
right.
It was like, because I thought, well, what is this? Can't see mental pictures. And then found aphantasia, and there's a Facebook group of people that have, and there's also different things like I can't hear music in my head. I never get music stuck in my head. If I hear music, it's my voice singing it, which is not good. So that's why my brain goes, no, don't get that stuck. So things like that. There's no sort of, not like an internal monologue or any of that stuff. It's a weird thing. Like it's not weird to me. It's normal. It's just how I think.
Yeah, of course, absolutely.
But when I compare it to how the majority of people think, I go, oh yeah, that is very different. How people,
but
perceive the world. Now
that you're aware of it, it hasn't changed the way you write at all, has it? It hasn't made you self-conscious of it or anything like that? Or?
No, not definitely not. No, it's what's interesting is people always say that my books are very descriptive and they're really good at conjuring up an image of a place. But it's like, and they go, it's like watching a movie, and I go like, no, for me it's not. So it's interesting that despite that not being able to picture it, I can somehow generate the words that let other people picture it, which is nice. But no, I've never it hasn't changed anything. It's made me aware of things a bit more. So I realize that when I'm reading, if there's big passages of description, then I'll skip over it because I can't. I'm just going, right, okay, it's a room. It's got slightly dated furniture. I get it. I don't need to know everything else. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I'll sort of zone out a bit and go on. And I've realised that's why I love writing dialogue and character interaction, and I love the rhythm of words and how they sort of fit together. So a sentence can be, an editor can send a sentence back and say, those words should be the other way around. And I go, yeah, but that doesn't fit with the tune that's in my head. So I need to flip them back that way. And I don't care if it's grammatically correct. That's the only way it works. And that took a bit of time working with, HarperCollins and things. I was on my third book before I kind of went, actually, I quite like that the way it is.
Yeah.
And the editor went, yeah, that's fine. And I was like, what? Hang on a minute.
Yes.
I thought you were in charge. Yeah. I thought I had to do everything you said. And he went, oh, no. It's all just suggestions. It's your book.
Yeah.
And I went, all right, okay, well, I'm changing nothing.
Yeah. It's a great moment when you realise you can do that.
Yeah. So it hasn't really changed much. It's just aware that, and I kind of go, well, one of my strengths, I think, is writing dialogue and that character stuff. And I think that comes as a result of not getting too bogged down by what things look like or any of that stuff.
Brilliant. Now, you mentioned Lego there, which weirdly is the next on my sort of bullet list of things to ask you about, because you and I share a love of the meditative qualities of Lego.
Oh,
it's the best, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. Yeah. It is the closest I get to meditation.
Do you reward yourself? I know we have, because one of our listeners, Jeevani Sharika, I know she rewards herself when she's finished a draft with a new Lego set. Is it a reward system that you give yourself, or?
I'd love to say I was that disciplined. I'd love to say that I did it only when I published a new book. But I just bought the Atari set, the Atari console thing. Just bought that, and they also at the same time they suggested that I might want to buy the Optimus Prime. So I went, yeah, go on then. Why not? And when it comes to Lego, I'm the easiest upsell in the world. So I've got loads to build. I've got the typewriter, the Lego typewriter. My wife got me that.
Brilliant.
So I've got that to build, but it looks insanely complex. So I opened the first bag, and it's all these tiny little loop pieces. There's 500 of these, and it's like, oh, I might just try the Millennium Falcon. I love it. It is complete, and I come up with some of my best ideas when I'm doing Lego, because you can just tune out and go, okay, right, I've got a story problem. I'll take a break and do Lego for an hour, and when I go back, I know what the next part is. So it is. I highly recommend Lego and dog walking.
Excellent.
For generating ideas.
Excellent stuff. What have you got coming in 20? You mentioned a book in May. What else have you got coming in 2023?
So one just came out on 28th of February called One for the Ages. I have a copy somewhere. That one just came out. It hit number one in the Kindle chart, which was nice. It's hit number one in the Bookstat ebook chart for overall ebook sales, which was lovely.
Fantastic.
And it's still knocking around the top 10 on Amazon, so that's really nice. I've got The One That Got Away, which is the first in a new series, which comes out at the end of May. And then there will be 2 more DCI Logan books this year in, I think, August or late July, and then September, I think. Brilliant. And possibly something surprising in November.
Fantastic. Well, look, this is the thing is you give us this gift of vivid characters and stories and descriptions that we play as a movie in our heads, a lot of us, and you it's kind of bittersweet that you can't, but then you enjoying the writing, so it's your gift to us, so we all thank you for that.
Thank you. I'm glad someone gets to take advantage of it.
Exactly. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Barry, for speaking to us today, and hope to speak to you again real soon.
No, thank you. Thanks for having me.
What are your writing dreams? Finishing that book, quitting the day job, becoming a best-selling author? Well, over 4 years, we've studied the advice of over 300 best-selling authors who've collectively sold over 500 million books. And we are excited to announce the Bestseller Academy. If you're ready to take your writing to the next level with accountability, craft, and coaching, your bestseller dreams are now only a click away. To find out more and apply, visit bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. That's bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. Oh, Mark, I tell you what, I live for these kind of moments on the podcast. It absolutely brilliant. Just wonderful.
Just to say as well, if you're listening to that and you're listening to Barry talking about aphantasia, and it might be aphantasia. I went on YouTube and looked at all the how to pronounce it videos, and there were ones for each, so I don't know how you pronounce it. But if you're listening to that and like Barry, you're thinking, hey, that's me. We're going to put a link in the show notes to the Aphantasia network, so you can check that out. So it's aphantasia.com. So and you can learn
let's talk about aphantasia as well, because it did strike me as I was listening to that. I was thinking to myself, in terms of thinking of our audience on the podcast, that there will probably be a number of people that will have suddenly be having this revelation that Barry had. I mean, it was Barry obviously had kids. It happened later on in his life, so. It's a very interesting thing, isn't it? Because it's something which is happening inside our heads. So we can go for many, many years in our life without realizing that that's not what most people experience. But listening to Barry's experience of it as a writer, it seems like it's a superpower in some strange way. I mean, you could see it as a real, like, you were talking with him about how it seemed a shame that he can't visualize, if you like, the things that he's seeing, the movies, because I was thinking of the idea of this movie playing in your head, which is what I kind of experienced. But the fact that it seems to like just enable him to write so prolifically is almost like a superpower as well. And from a writer's perspective, I'm just curious as to firstly, if you're listening to this podcast and you've suddenly realized, actually, that's me, we want to hear from you. Let us know if this has been your kind of wake up or aha moment where you're thinking, holy moly, and tell us a little bit about how it has affected or how it helps your writing, if you've kind of tied some things together. But have you heard of this before, Mark? Have you talked about this with others before?
I'd not. No. It was new to me, and I think what it illustrates more than anything else is we all have our own way of perceiving the world, and that is something. Whatever kind of writer you are, you need to be aware of. It's something I talked about in last week's extended version in the craft bit. I was talking about the kind of biases that we have. There are certain base boilerplate things that we assume about the world that we assume everyone else has, and this is one of them. We just assume, people all think the way I think, people hear things the way I hear things, people imagine things, and they don't. So I think once you find something like this, it opens a door for all of us to realize, okay, this idea of neurotypical or whatever, I think we're all on all perceiving the world in a slightly different way, and I think that and the more we learn about these things, and this thing as an author, it's all about empathy. You've got to put yourself in the shoes of other people, even people. When you're writing your villains, when you're writing your heroes, they've all got to be the hero of their own story. So it's just all about realizing that the world doesn't see the world as you see it, and that's a very important lesson to learn.
Yeah, I actually had one of those moments. It's not quite as kind of mind blowing as the story that Barry talked about, but I was at a festival once, and it was really like the porta potties or the porta cabins were rank, and I was chatting with some of the band, and they're saying, how can you go in there? And I said, I just block my nose. And they're like, what do you mean you block your nose? I said, I can just block my sense of smell.
Now that's a superpower.
Well, then they looked at me, and listen, I was like in my 30s, Mark, and they looked at me and said, what do you mean block your nose? I said, I can just do it. I can just turn it off. I can turn off smell.
No way.
And this, yeah. And I don't understand this, because I can just do it so easily. And I try to explain it to people, and most people say to me, what do you mean you turn it? And honestly, it was only because of this interview that it kind of triggered the memory again. I've never really had a proper conversation with even the doctor about how I do it, but I can literally block off my nose so I can't smell anything. And wow. I can do it like that. So am I weird, or are there other people out in the world? So listen, if you can do that as well, it's very handy. I mean, it's brilliant for, many situations.
Did you like when you were a teenager, did you like work in an abattoir or a butcher's or anything like that?
No, I don't. I honestly, and it's that thing. I've never questioned it. It's just, I always thought that everyone else could do it until I talk to people, and everyone's like, what do you mean you can turn off your smell on and off? And I just do it. And it's actually a movement. It's actually like, it's almost like I've got, I know it sounds weird, but it's like I've got flaps at the top. It sounds awful.
How have we got 6.5 years through this podcast and I'm learning this now?
It's not quite like that, but in terms of how I visualize it, it's almost like I've got like flaps at the top of my nostrils that I can just close off my nostrils. I don't understand. So listen, if there's a doctor out there that can explain what I'm experiencing, I would love to understand it. Maybe it has a name. I don't know. But I don't think I've ever met, because I've only had a very small number of, not on a national, like international podcast, of course, but like very small like conversation with a couple of friends about it in my lifetime. So anyway, that's my... I don't know which I prefer. I prefer probably just to be able to write prolifically than to be able to turn off sense of smell. But.
Yes. Does it help you write? Let's get back on track.
God, we've got so much to talk about. I don't know why I went on for Tanya, but I had to throw that in. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about this whole experience that J.D. Kirk Barry had through his youth. And we got to start with the deputy head at his school who told him, you got to, don't be daft, don't be an author, become an English teacher. And I mean, firstly, just, we've always talked about those moments in life where somebody says something that can encourage you, but this happens way more, doesn't it? Somebody saying, get a real job, or don't be so dreamy, get something that's going to pay you an income. And I just love the story about how that teacher then shows up at one of his... I mean, you couldn't write it, could you? You cannot write that story that he shows
Absolutely
up.
Beautiful, yeah.
Was it the Edinburgh Festival, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And he had to go up to him.
What get me? Me write words good. What got me is that the deputy head said, "People like you don't become authors." What a thing to say.
I know.
Ugh. It's like the antithesis of this podcast, which is, it's just, it makes me so cross. So, if the moral of this episode, if there's anything you're going to take away from this, because you also had the teacher who said, "Oh, comics aren't reading." Yeah, ignore the naysayers. All right. If anyone gives you an absolute like that, you can't be an author. Comics aren't, don't count as reading. Ignore these people. Anyone who deals in absolutes is
totally. Also, it extends, doesn't it? Not beyond childhood. It extends to people today that are getting rejected by an editor, that are getting rejected by agents, that are getting rejected by a publisher. Oh, there isn't a market for this. That's an absolute. Keep writing and keep sending us your stuff. Which is basically saying, well, maybe your novel in 3 novels will be good enough to publish. Like, these are all people with opinions. And I would say this again, opinions are the cheapest commodity on the earth. It's like, please do never ever take the stuff to heart. Always take the good stuff when people encourage you. I mean, we can talk about that in a minute. But when people encourage you, like fill your boots. But if anyone ever tells you that you're never going to be able to do something, what you have to realize is what's actually going on there is it's them self-reflecting to you how they feel about themselves. It's them self-reflecting to you that maybe the deputy head wanted to become an author and didn't have the cojones to do it, right? Yeah. And then has to basically justify their decision that they made 20 years ago by telling everyone else that they can't do it, because God forbid if they did do it, it might make the deputy head feel like, what if I had actually had the courage? And that, folks, is what's going on. It's completely the opposite of what we hear when we receive that information. You always hold the mirror up and go, "Oh, you've had an interesting life," saying stuff like that. And there's a story behind it. And you can always challenge people on that and say, "Oh, were you thinking one day of being an author?" And you're probably, "Oh, yeah. No, I thought I went and became my dad told me I should probably study as a teacher." And then you suddenly realize that there's a motive behind why they're telling you it. It's not that they don't want you to succeed. It's that it is that they don't want you to succeed because they're feeling like a failure in their own life. So just remember that, folks.
Yeah. And for the last time, people, comics count as reading, all right? From the Beano to Asterix to Tintin to Mouse to Sandman to 2000 AD, From Hell, Judge Dredd, Spider-Man, Wonder Woman, Saga, Star Wars, whatever comics are read. If anything, they're more difficult to read because you're not just processing words, you're processing pictures and blending them together. Comics are hard. I've tried writing comics as well. They're really hard.
They're really hard.
Yeah.
We both, I mean, we're here talking about us, old men now and we both, this is our story. We both grew up in comics. I did not read books until I read a few little books, but I didn't read proper books, like, decent, like, something over 50 pages long. That you'd consider to be an adult written story. I was 12 at 13. Up until then, from ages 4 up until right the way through to early teens, I read comics. It's all I did. But I didn't just read them; I devoured them. Mm-hmm. I collected them. I had stacks and stacks. I would go to car boot fairs. I'd buy annuals. I must have read more than most kids, even though they were little kind of bubbles with words in it. So if you're listening to this and your child is not interested in reading, get them comics. It is the route in. Let's talk about that now, because, okay, Mrs. McAllister.
Oh, Mrs. McAllister.
I listened back to this about 3 times. It's such a brilliant story. Yeah. But firstly, we want to find out, is Mrs. McAllister still out there?
Barry, let us know.
Barry, let us know, or get in contact. If somebody knows this Mrs. McAllister in the Scottish School Library somewhere, we don't know if she's still alive, but if she is, we would love to play her back. If she hasn't heard it, that piece the story that Barry told us. But absolute genius, foresight. Like, that is how you work with children, isn't it? And you encourage, on every level, just encouraging. And I love the fact that she started off by giving him a load of comics. So she didn't fight what the other teacher was obviously struggling with. It's a right protagonist, antagonist in the whole story, isn't it, with those two? But the fact that and maybe she didn't have an ulterior motive or a big plan to get him to write, but in that moment, she gave him that notepad. And I often think to myself, having listened back to it, what would have happened if she didn't give him that notepad?
Yeah.
Would he be on this podcast today? Would he have written 200 plus books? I just think that we talked in the past about finding a partner. Like, if you find your Julie, a partner or a friend who's really supportive and helping you, encouraging you to write, pushing you to write, telling you you're good, all of those things that we need as a writer to hear. But we all need a Mrs. McAllister, don't we, at any stage in our life? And so if you had that person in your life that changed everything for you, maybe at a young age, we want to hear your story. So do contact us on the podcast and tell us about this person so that we can honor them. Because I think people like Mrs. McAllister don't get enough credit in the world. They're very quietly working their magic in the backdrop of the world. And then, let's remind ourselves, Mark, of that experience you had, because talking about teachers that encouraged and inspired you.
Yeah, well, the first fantasy I read was The Wizard of Earthsea, Ursula Le Guin, and it was a teacher called Miss Maloney at Woodville School who, got us reading it. And I invited her to the launch of The Ghost of Ivy Barn, my last, which is a Woodville book. And I dedicated the book to her and a couple of other teachers who encouraged me. And it was just great. She came along with her son and granddaughter, and it was really moving. It was really, a wonderful thing. It felt like it's just nice to be able to turn around and say, thank you. I probably wouldn't be doing this if it hadn't been for a little bit of encouragement. Just teachers going, yeah, you're good at this, keep going. It makes such a difference, a difference. Bless them all.
Totally.
And like he said, libraries change lives. Absolutely.
Oh my gosh.
And then you get someone like Iain Banks, who now I've been blogging about, cause it's been 10 years since we started filming Robot Overlord. So I've been looking at my diaries from 10 years ago, and I saw roughly 10 years ago this week, Iain Banks passed away far too young. And I had the pleasure of meeting him, and as did JD. And again, that full circle thing where he met Iain Banks at a school visit who, as you said, had some choice words. But then a few years later, Barry ended up sitting next to him at a signing table, and then Iain Banks asked Barry to sign his book for him. I mean, man, you must be pinching yourself, Yeah. But Iain Banks knew. He was a good soul. He knew what he was doing when he did that,
Exactly. But the fact that he did it, so many other authors might just be so wrapped up in their own glory of their book signing, they wouldn't be thinking about how
Yeah.
How doing that one random, not really random, but a planned act of
little
kindness.
act of kindness, yeah.
Right? Planned act of kindness that just took, Barry's world to a whole new level. Because I do really fundamentally believe that there are people in our lives that come into our lives at certain times when we most need to get some level of external validation. Not to feed our ego. It's never about that. Although that's obviously does happen, but it's actually about helping us to believe in ourselves. It's the external validation that finally allows us to wake up to our own brilliance, our own genius, our own talents that everyone has these. We all have different things that we're good at doing, and we have to celebrate them. But when somebody outside of us who we really admire gives you that level of feedback, you then believe it. And that belief is like rocket fuel to whatever it is that they're talking about, whether it's your writing, whether it's talent that you have. 100%. And so I think, as authors, any successful authors listening to us right now, like, what can you do? It'll have happened to you as well. What can you do at your next book signing? How can you continue to encourage the next generation, in quotes, of authors who are on their journey? Because I think it's really important to remember just how incredible powerful those small moments are. They might not seem like much to the person doing it, but the story that then comes on the podcast, like X many years later, is phenomenal. Absolutely brilliant. Now let's also talk about it's just so much to cover. Let's talk about the value of meditative work for working through problems, story problems, or just general mental health stuff. Like you talked about how much you love to do Lego, and that's something that you shared with Barry. Barry also mentioned dog walking. We've had a lot of people talk about just going for walks and working through ideas and challenges. Do you know, for me, Mark, what it is puzzles, which as I was listening back to the interview, I thought, what is a Lego kit but a 3-dimensional puzzle? I am like, and I don't know if people have noticed this, but if you go into like bookstores now, there's usually a whole puzzle section. It's all happened since COVID. Our library, talking about, libraries, we need libraries. Our libraries has a puzzle section now, has a whole massive section where you can, there's like 100 puzzles that you can just take one and return it. But this idea of doing something other than writing to work through your writing, I think is a very, very powerful technique that I don't think enough people know about or think about doing.
Yeah, Lego's expensive. I appreciate that. So what I've started doing is taking them apart and putting them back together again. And I don't know if most people know this, but you can find, if you don't have the instructions anymore, they're all online. Lego provide them as PDFs. It's brilliant. So, whatever, if you take the kit apart and then put it back together again, you've got 2 exercises in. But I know that I can feel my blood pressure going down as I do it. There's absolutely no question that it sends me to a much, much calmer place where nothing else worries me. So, absolutely. I remember when I was at Orion, we published Richard Hammond's book, the Top Gear guy, and he had his car crash, and he had brain damage because of their car crash. And he credits Lego with essentially rewiring his brain and healing his brain when he was recovering. So I think there's absolutely a lot in this. And, if you can get your hands on Lego or puzzles or whatever, it's just something where it's challenging and it's engaging and it's rewarding because you've got something at the end of it as well.
The thing I like about puzzles in particular is that it's social as well. I found in a world where kids are disappearing to their rooms and playing on video games, or we actually have a dedicated puzzle table right in the middle of our main room. And we used to just have a puzzle once a year at Christmas, and then it started to extend into January and then February. And I started finding puzzles that were themed around certain types of year. So I've got a Halloween puzzle now and a spring puzzle and a summer puzzle. And then I just get random stuff. But what I found is brilliant is I could never imagine my 19-year-old son doing a puzzle. He bloody finished one off the other day. I walked in to do a few pieces and it was done. I'm like, oi, who's finished the puzzle? But we're all sitting around the table. Sometimes there'd be 2 or 3 of us, and you don't even have to have conversations with people. Sometimes it's about sitting there and just being with someone and doing something together. And it's a lovely way of firstly, the socialization side of things. I think that's a bit hard with maybe a bit harder with Lego building.
I've done it. No, I've done it.
Have you done it?
My 4-year-old great nephew, who I haven't been able to get to know him because he lives quite a distance away, and of course through lockdown, the last time I'd seen him, he was essentially a toddler. And so he has no memory of me at all. So he came over a few months ago, and I had a little Lego kit, and I was like, come on, let's do this one together. And we had the book out, and I was saying, right, can you pass me that bit? Where do you think that goes? So we did that together, and we spent about an hour working on it together. And apparently my nephew said, yeah, he calls you the man with the Lego now. And I'm like,
the man with the Lego.
If that's how he remembers me.
I guess. I love it. I love it. It's great. My thing actually, Mark, as well, is I have a number of, they sound like I'm a real geek now, but I have about 3 different puzzles which are bookshops. And there's something, it's kind of like I'm looking at book themed puzzles as well. And there's some brilliant ones out there. So if you have never thought about doing that, folks, as a writing exercise, I want to give you some homework today in this podcast. I want you to think about getting a puzzle and setting it up and just having it somewhere in your house. If you've got space to do that, watch out for your cat, because my cat jumps on the table and it walks off with pieces. Absolute nightmare. But we want you to try this as an experiment. Use it rather than sitting and trying to work through something that you're stuck on. Just go and do a puzzle and think about it there, and it's magic happens. It's incredible. So do try that. Brilliant stuff. Well, listen, in the extended episode edition of this podcast, we've got so much that we want to cover. We're going to talk a little bit more about agents and competitions, and really dive deeply into like the value of entering competitions and the incredible things that can happen, like we saw with Barry getting taken out of the competition and getting a deal. We're going to talk about how you can reframe the possibilities of your writing output. We're going to like really examine what magic's happening there with Barry's writing. How is it that he can write 3,000 words a day? How can he write 200 words? And it seems like at 200 books, and it seems like a joy for him, not a torture. We're also going to talk about the value of talking, going out and talking to students, and what that can lead to, how this self-publishing route changed Barry's life. There's so much to cover. And also the unicorn compromise, which is really going into, things that you're asked to do by a publisher that you don't want to do. And then finally, we're going to talk a little bit about declaring your dreams and author accountability, and how that helped Barry move into writing crime and again changed his writing life. So if you'd like to dive deep with us in the extended, then pop along to bestsellerexperiment.com/support and pledge an amount to support the continued making of this podcast, and you can get all of these extra goodies. So Mark, let's chat about this week's amazing wins by our listeners and Academy members.
Okay, got a fun one to start with. We've got Pernilla Hughes, who's been a guest on the podcast as well. She talks about milestones. Yesterday, I saw a book of mine in a charity shop for the first time. I've been published for nearly 5 years. I can't decide whether it feels like a milestone. It feels like, oh, look, it's my book. But on the flip side, it's been given away. Obviously, I did consider buying it, as it was only £1 and excellent value. So milestone or not, what do you think, Mr. D?
I think it's a milestone for a number of reasons. Number one,
yeah.
If you never published a book, you're never going to get into a charity store. Number two, I buy a ton of my books from thrift stores and charity stores. That's how I discover new authors. And number three, if somebody's actually read the book and loved it, there are 2 different types of readers. There are readers that read books, love them, and hang on to them for the rest of their life and reread them. But there's other kind of people who they read a book, they love it, and they want to pass it on. And that's
exactly,
how they do it.
Yeah.
So I think, the more, let's be honest, go into a charity shop, who's the number one author you see the most novels of? It's usually James Patterson, right? Because he's the most published author. And so I think it's a right of honor. Let's bring it on. Let's get more of our books into the charity stalls, and hey, maybe that's a way of distributing some of our own novels. If you've got a stack of them in the garage, they're better off a couple of them in the charity stores doing some work on your behalf. You might end up getting some more readers. So
we got a lovely little win from Liz Green, who does brilliant nonfiction and is, an editor and a consultant when it comes to nonfiction, but she's been working on a novel. And she says, you'll all appreciate this. She posted this in the BXP team, which is, where a lot of our patron supporters gather and academics gather. And she says, you'll all appreciate this. My word count tracker shows I finally cracked 10,000 words. Finally. And she posted a picture of it on the BXP team. Now, we were talking about an extended version tracking reading your words and the profound effect that has on your productivity. And it really does make a difference, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant stuff, Liz. Congratulations.
And we got a couple of authors just weirdly in the same week changing their cover art style. So Ian W. Sainsbury, Kindle Storyteller Award winner. He's Jimmy Blue Books, which I love. I absolutely love these books. They've been given a complete kind of makeover. So they've gone, basically the covers are black, red and white, and that runs through the whole series. And it really captures the kind of Jekyll and Hyde kind of character at the center of it. So, and he's doing this, to just experiment and see if it makes a difference to sales as well. And likewise, Elizabeth Hurley in the BXP group, who writes here as Anna Penrose, she's just updated the cover to her book, The Body in the Wall, and it is gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. So covers, that makes such a huge difference to whether or not, meeting those kind of reader expectations of what's, between the pages. So it can be a massive difference. Yeah, so good luck to both of them.
And actually remembering that interview, I think interview number 3 or 4 that we did at the very beginning of the podcast about talking with Shannon Mayer, the prolific indie writer, who said that it was the changing of a cover of one of her books that changed everything for her. It started selling, it sold, when before it wasn't selling at all. So really encourage people, if you are sitting on a book that's not really doing what you expected, it's a really good story, then maybe it's not the story, maybe it's the cover. So it's good to experiment, folks.
Absolutely. Right? And it's something I was reading about in a book called From Zero to Four Figures, Making $1,000 a Month Self-Publishing Fiction by our very own Paul Arduin, member of the BXP group. And actually, I'm hoping he's just published that this week. I've got a copy. I'm very interested in making $1,000 a month from self-publishing. So I'm dipping into that. I'm hoping to get Paul on maybe for a deep dive soon. We should do that soon. So maybe not. But I'll put a link in the show notes so you can check that out, because it's available across all platforms as well, and it covers some really good stuff there. So congrats to Paul on that.
Brilliant, Paul. Well done.
And just going back to basics here, the 200 word a day challenge, it really does work. I just love this tweet from Roisin Meany, who says, "Come on, get writing, everyone. You can do 200 words before breakfast." And it's so true, isn't it, Mr. D?
Absolutely. 200 words. It's like, it's less time than it takes you to make yourself a cup of coffee. In fact, make yourself a cup of coffee. Start your words whilst the kettle's boiling and race the kettle. How many words can you write before the kettle is boiled? You can get at least, I reckon you get 50 to 100 if you just went for it. Right,
absolutely.
in a couple of minutes.
Right, without fear.
Go for it. Yeah. So do that, folks, and then enjoy your cup of tea or coffee as you finish off your 200 words, and maybe a few more for the day, because that's what we tend to find. People that do the 200 word challenge on average are writing over 600 words a day, folks, and that's the magic of it. So if you want to go and try it, 200wordchallenge.com. It's our free challenge to all of our listeners and friends and family as well. Tell the world about this, because it really does create a habit for a lifetime. It's scientifically proven, folks, so go for it.
If you want to get in touch with people, we're on social media. We're on Facebook, Bestseller Experiment. Twitter and Instagram is @bestsellerxp. You can find us at bestsellerexperiment.com. There's a contact tab there where you can drop us a line via email, and we read all of them. And get in touch. Tell us your wins. Tell us what's working for you.
Brilliant stuff. And if you'd like to join our weekly newsletter, again, go to the website, bestsellerexperiment.com, click on the newsletter tab and pop in your email. And we should also make a bit of a reveal. A few weeks ago, we were talking about favourite words, and we put a challenge out to our listeners, and we said, send us some words, interesting words that we may have never heard of. And we got an amazing word today, didn't we, by Sarah
Zeman. Is it Zeman?
Yes.
Zeman.
So Sarah sent us this amazing word, which Mark and I have slipped into today's podcast, one in the regular podcast and one in the extended edition. And the word of today, Mark, is
charrette. And Sarah says, you recently asked for unusual words to drop into the podcast. Apparently, charrette, from French for little cart, means an intense period of creative work before a deadline. I think we've all been there. Yes, we have, Sarah. It can also be a meeting specifically set up to brainstorm a problem or design something. Apparently, it's used in North America, so Mr. D may have come across the usage, but I've never heard it used here in the UK. And it comes from the etymology. Charrette is derived from the French word for little cart in Paris during the 19th century, professors at the École des Beaux-Arts circulated with little carts to collect final drawings from their students. Students would jump on the charrette to put finishing touches on their presentation minutes before the deadline. Look, we've all learned something new today. Brilliant. Thank you, Sarah. Sarah is also at Bardy Mum on Twitter, and I'll put a link to her website as well, so you can check out her poetry.
So if you've got an interesting word for us to sneak into the podcast in the next couple of weeks, just drop along to the contact us and send us an email. And that's brilliant. And just to say, like, living in North America, I've never heard that word before. So I absolutely love it, though. Perfect one. And very tied in today with all of the deadlines we talked about, the extended edition, right? So don't forget, folks, if you'd like to support the podcast, it's bestsellerexperiment.com/support, and then get access to what we probably recorded about half an hour extra today for everyone that wants to go a bit deeper with us. But brilliant stuff. Well, listen, folks, thank you so much for joining us. And it's a goodbye until next week from Mark 1.
And then a goodbye from Mark 2. Goodbye.
Goodbye.